Hello, ideaXme listeners. This is Hollie Fraser, the Ambassador for Reading, Writing and Literature. Today we'll be speaking with Uli Beutter Cohen, founder of Subway Book Review, also a reporter for the Lily News. So, welcome Uli. Tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, Holly. Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. And I think the best way to describe what I do is by telling you something that you must know about me, which is that I'm fascinated with how we communicate and how we share space. And that is what drives me to do all the things that I do in life.
So, explain to people who don't know what Subway Book Review is.
I started Subway Book Review when I moved to New York City in 2013, and it really came out of the desire to connect with the city more, and of course to find out who all of these fabulous New Yorkers are that I was surrounded by every day. And I felt that a book is such a good way to start a conversation with someone. And in 2013, I still saw massive amounts of books on the subway. We can talk about what that is like now later, I'm sure. But I couldn't help but notice it and decided to approach a person. It was a young woman in December 2013. She was reading Catching Fire. And it was a totally awkward, brief conversation, but I kind of had the idea or light bulb to record it by typing the conversation and to also take the photo of the young woman. And that's really how it started. I thought, okay, this wasn't much. It was literally one sentence. And she said, I like the movie and I'm reading the book. And that was it. So from there, though, I was kind of hooked, and I thought it was totally electrifying to break etiquette and to just go up to someone, especially as a woman. I don't think you're necessarily expected to go up to a stranger and initiate a conversation. So there was just so much thrill in it, and then I couldn't stop. And now I'm over 700 conversations into it, have spent hundreds of hours on the subway, have collected hundreds of conversations, and am sharing them all over the internet.
So did you approach her because you connected with that book, or just because you wanted to approach her? What was the reason you started it in that moment?
I didn't even see what the book was. I only saw her holding a book.
Okay.
I had just made a bet with myself that, that day I had to do it. And so I was at the end of my subway ride and I was like, all right, last chance, now is the moment to do it or you're going to have missed this opportunity. And so that was more it. It was that I had been riding the subway that day and had noticed all of these books. And I thought, okay, one of these people you just have to ask. And I let all these people pass by. And she was my last chance to try. And so with that trial, so far a 4-year-long project was born.
So for you, was it more about connecting with people and the approach was simply through the books? What was it that made you want to approach someone? What gave you that idea?
Yeah, it was a little bit of all of it. I think the driving aspect of it was really to connect with people. I had just moved to a giant city and had some connections and some people that I knew through work, but I really felt like New York is such a huge canvas and everybody wants to make their distinct mark on it. I thought that I could learn a lot about the city and the micro society that we're part of here, and really wanted to find out who all of these people were and what was on their mind. And of course, in 2013 was a very different landscape than now, just in terms of what was going on in the social media sphere, what was going on politically. And I've always wanted to work on behalf of minorities and on behalf of those who don't have as much of a voice. So I thought New York, being the melting pot that it is, I can really connect with people from so many different backgrounds, from so many different walks of life that I would also otherwise just have no access to. And I could catch a glimpse into their fears and into their hopes. And, you know, in an ideal case, here are some of their secrets. And all of that over the years has proven to be true.
How many people do you speak to now? Has it changed a lot? Is it a lot more, or have you always spoken to kind of one person a week, or how has it evolved the last few years?
So I started by just speaking to people whenever I was riding the train, and I'm a fairly curious person, so I've always covered a lot of ground in New York City. I was told, oh, you'll move here and you'll kind of have your neighborhood and you'll go, you know, back and forth between the place you work. And I thought, well, that sounds terribly simple and boring and not like the point of being in New York. So I kind of made a point to use the subway as my little lifeline to connect me to all of these places that I was so curious about. And so on these trips to these different neighborhoods, I would, of course, see a lot of different books and different people on the subway, and I would speak to them. But then I found out that what's really amazingly fun for me is to block out 4 or 5 hours and to just kind of go rogue and to just be on trains and ride them wildly for that time being and follow a reader to their station, or you know, just take more time with them on the train and speak to them for a little bit longer. That has become kind of the mix. So these longer pockets of time, I almost call it like doing yoga or meditating, because you lose track of where you are. You have no idea anymore how many people you've already spoken with. You don't know if you're going uptown or downtown. You don't care if a train is broken down. AC isn't even on your mind. You don't know if you're, you know, in one of those cars that is just super packed. You're just kind of there. Yeah. And that to me is like, that's the funnest time to do it. The project has turned into me observing cultural trends. These books say a lot about us, and people carry them as an extension of themselves. So just like someone's wearing a cool hat or a cool shirt to express who they are, people also read books as an expression of their identity or questions they have about their identity.
Yeah, I think it's easy to make snap judgments about people because of the books they're reading.
Well, hopefully not. I mean, you can't do it unless you ask them. And I've been 100% wrong about just by looking at a person and their book most of the time. That's why I do believe, you know, not just taking a photo just doesn't do it justice. You have to have the conversation to really give the person the proper context. That's what I believe as a storyteller and as a reporter and as an observer. But by observing what these people are carrying, what these pages are saying, and what their thoughts about those pages are, you really get an insight into the cultural shifts that are taking place. For example, last year was all about race relations. It was about female identity. This year is so much about utopia, dystopia, and we're really seeing people trying to make sense of the political situation by seeking out those kind of books. So then it's on me as an observer to find the best examples and say, look, here is what's going on, here is what we're reading, and here is why. And this person's going to tell you about it.
I think that's what's so interesting, because I think ultimately most people do, you know, see someone who's reading a title and assume they know that person, but you've taken the time to unearth the reasons why they're really reading it and who they are and what they're about. Have you found people are receptive? How much do people not want to speak to you versus people really open up? Have you found actually people really want to talk about it?
People love being asked about their life. I mean, they are used to it from Facebook. They do it 100 times a day. What's on your mind is the question on Facebook. And I think we're used to it and we're trained to it by social media to answer that question. And when someone does it in real life and is actually asking about our thoughts, what's going on with us, people are pretty delighted. They're kind of ready to go. And in some instances, people tell me, no one has asked me about what I'm thinking in weeks, I'm realizing.
Yeah, I think people are really receptive to talking, more than you'd think.
More than you think, because we're all very out there in our digital lives, but we're also pretty isolated.
So I guess that hasn't been a challenge, getting people to open up. Are there any challenges you have come across along this project? What's the most challenging thing you've encountered?
The most challenging thing is that trains now have Wi-Fi. I think that's my biggest. And I say that, of course, half jokingly, because if a person is reading on their Kindle or their book or their phone, as long as people are reading, it's fantastic. But a screen really does something different to a person. And I was recently part of this fantastic project, Books on the Subway, which is one of my favorite projects, because Books on the Subway obviously places books on the subway, and then people pick them up and then they can read them and can put them back. And I had these books with me because I was a guest curator and had picked a book out to put on the subway. And I saw this young woman, and she was looking at her screen, and her face was just so zoned out. She kind of had the glow from the screen on her face. It was in the evening. It was during rush hour. And she just kind of looked sad and checked out. And I put a book next to her on the bench and walked away. And she looked at me and was like, "What did you just do?" Then she looked at the book. And she saw that I wasn't doing anything with it, and she picked it up, and she started smiling right away. Her whole expression changed. Her whole body expression changed. Her body language changed. And I thought that was so cool and fascinating. And I see that all the time, that people who are looking at their screen, they're just kind of like, yeah, they're not really there. They're not really, unless, of course, they're listening to a hilarious podcast, but they're kind of in a different reality. But with a book, you see that they're engaged still, and they're expressing still. And I think that's a super cool difference. So that's why I'm saying, Wi-Fi is nobody's enemy. Being connected is a beautiful thing. I have a project that's huge on social media, and not huge, but, that is only huge, or what it is, because of social media. But I do think, like, having these in real life things that then create a connection or allow someone else in, or even just make you connect differently with life, it's important to hold on to those.
Do you speak to multiple people and then you kind of curate which ones you want to share with the world, or do you go for a conversation and you just see where it ends up, and you know you're going to use it before you've heard what they say? Or how do you go about curating the things you share back?
Yeah, I go for a broad sample. In my book review approach, I collect book reviews from people of all ages, all backgrounds. I try to cover a lot of ground on the city. I have, of course, my favorite spots, but where I stake out and then see who comes my way there. Like Union Square is one of my favorite places to hang out and see what people are reading, because I feel like that's a hub where everybody comes through. I try to create an honest collection of what I see all kinds of people reading, and then I try to find the best examples and the best representatives of that. For example, Albert Camus, who wrote The Stranger, I see that book being read quite a bit, and then I will try to find a good example of that.
So what's been your favorite thing so far about starting the project? Are there any memorable moments?
One that comes to mind is that I really love when I see a person again years later, or even days later, and I see them again in the most crazy circumstance. I mean, it's a city of millions, and were riding subway trains, which, like, think about the chance that that door would open, you'd get on that same train card as that person, and you happen to turn at the exact same moment and you see each other again. I get such a kick out of that. I can't even tell you. I saw a young woman, I think I spoke to her in 2014, and she was reading a book because she didn't understand love and relationships. And she told me that she just can't figure out men. Her name was Lily. I remember that. And she was reading this book and she was like, I really don't understand men. I really don't understand relationships. And then I saw her 2 years later, and she had gotten married, and she was like, things are great. Like, I'm in a relationship now. I figured it out. I was like, that's so cool. You know, that's such a neat moment. December 31st, 2015, I saw a man, and it was New Year's Eve, and I really wanted to find, like, the perfect book review for the last day of the year. And I just couldn't find anyone who I felt, you know, was really excited to talk that night, which was unusual because, like I said, usually people love it. And this young man with this giant backpack kind of kept stepping in front of me. And I almost started to get irritated and wanted to be like, get this freaking backpack out of my face. And I was like, no, wait. Then I realized, no, I just have to ask him if he happens to have a book in that backpack. And he didn't have any out in his hands. And so I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, sorry, this is an absurd question, but do you have any books with you? And he said, yes, my whole backpack is full of books, actually. And he pulled out, I'm not kidding, like 12 books. And they were all about Rwanda because he was thinking about traveling there and spending time there to better explore and understand that country. And he was like, last day of the year, now I have to do it. I talked to you about it. You took my photo. And I wished him well, and we parted ways. And then 4 days later, I was doing, you know, something crazy, like the F to the A to the G or something like that. And as I was waiting at Hoyt Schermerhorn, the doors opened of the G. And, of course, right in front of me stands Jacques, who I had just spoken with. And he had one of his Rwanda books with him again, and he told me that he had booked the ticket and that he was going to go for 3 months and that he had done it, and that our conversation was the thing that gave him the last push. So those things are super amazing, but in every conversation, I just learn something, and I get a new perspective on life that I didn't have before. And I'm grateful for all of that. And in sharing that, I hope other people get that too.
Those are magical moments. I can't believe you bump into people again.
It's the funnest. And it's kind of, it doesn't make sense, you know, because it's like, well, maybe it makes sense. I guess it makes sense. Life makes sense in a way that it doesn't. So maybe we leave it at that.
What can you tell us about the future of Subway Book Review and where it's going?
So currently, Subway Book Review is here in New York, where I'm roaming the subway and am looking for readers. I also have contributors in London and in Mexico City, and I'm looking for contributors in other cities. We're currently all women. Subway Book Review is a fully women-run operation, which I'm very happy about. It's not intentional, it just happens to be that way. The women who apply to be contributors are super badass and have an incredible resume and an incredible personality, so they turned out to be the right ones. But yeah, I'm looking to expand to other cities, and then I'm also hoping to create a series, TV or web series that takes me to cities around the world to get a firsthand impression about what people around the world are reading.
Are you going to do that yourself, fund it yourself? How are you going to go about bringing it to life?
I just went to Mexico City and I shot a segment there because I really had no idea what people in Mexico are reading, and I felt that with the conversation being about a wall being erected and about the dreamers and about immigration, and that conversation happening, of course, from political parties in a very particular kind of way, I needed to go and I needed to just see what regular life on the street was like, and I was blown away. I don't want to give away too much because I would love for you to watch the film that I made, but the readership on the metro in Mexico City puts the readership in New York to shame. There are so many books on the metro in Mexico City, and books are just part of everyday life in a very magical way. And I really didn't know it. And I'm really happy I went, and I have a totally different access to that city now and to the people who live there after kind of having taken this kind of look at the city and at the citizens who live there through the lens of books. So I'm excited to share that, and then I can't wait to go back out. I am working on pitching the series to a network, so hopefully I will have good news soon.
Fingers crossed. Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what advice can you give people who want to start their own idea?
I really believe in making actionable steps for yourself and not making a super long to-do list with 15,000 things on it. How I started Subway Book Review was by saying, okay, this week I have to talk to one person because I've noticed something, and now it's on me to follow through on that and to just try and experiment. And so I just had one goal. I just said, okay, you're going to ride the subway and you're going to talk to one of these readers. And then you're just going to see what happens. And that's a really actionable step to take because it's like one thing that you have to do. And then after that, I was like, okay, cool. That was fun. This week, let's try to talk to 2 people. Fantastic. Let's try to talk to 3 people. And then the next step was to say, let's see if we can just have fun riding the subway for 4 hours and just relax into it and see what that does. Oh, that's super fun and actually really fruitful. Cool, let's do that. And then the next step was to kind of be like, okay, let's make an Instagram account. Let's talk a friend who's a really good designer into making me a little icon so that I have, some kind of look about it. Let's find a really cool look for the photography and have fun exploring what that could be. And that's kind of how the black and white format came about. In other words, it's a step-by-step process, and it's so much better to take a small step than to take no step at all.
It's a really interesting point, starting small. How did it become so big? What steps did you take to get to, what are you, nearly at 100,000 followers now on Instagram?
Yeah, we're at... holistically on all channels we're at 125,000 plus. On Instagram I think it's 90,000 something. You can do it for that reason though. I think that followers are amazing and followers are great because it means that other people have an interest in what you do. But the most important thing in any project that you do is for you to find out what you want to practice and how you want to express yourself in the world. And we all express ourselves differently. I mentioned earlier that I'm fascinated with how we communicate and how we share space. That's something that I explore in all of my work and everything that I do. And so in Subway Book Review, I also do this. And I've decided for myself how I practice it within that project. And I think that that's really the most important thing that you can do is to practice expressing yourself. That's a fantastic thing, and that's also something that no matter how you do that, it gives you something so great, which is a connection to the world and to the people around you. It's very fulfilling to do that. So the practice in and of itself is really the goal. There's no other goal. But for me, the goal is to practice as much as I can and to do it with as much joy that I can get out of it.
And it's more about kind of personal fulfillment, I guess. I feel like the same with Books on the Subway. You ultimately have to do it for yourself, and then hopefully people are interested and follow along. And I think that's a great goal to set for yourself, to do it for yourself and please yourself and set the goals you want to reach and forget about everyone else.
Yeah, forget about everyone else, but also we're not just doing it for ourselves at all. I mean, I do it to have a conversation with an individual at a very spontaneous moment. You do your project so that someone can find a spontaneous present in the form of a book in a space that they didn't expect to find that present in. So no, you absolutely cannot do it for yourself. I think the mission is always to give something to someone. But I think in terms of the practice, the goal is to stay in the practice. The actions that I take, I know affect other people. And so I've just brought more awareness, I guess, to my actions and said, what can I give to people in this crazy busy city? Everybody's coming here to make something happen. And everybody ultimately wants to be seen and heard. That's why we're all in New York. How can I give someone that moment in a very small way? And then how can I do that on a grander scale by going into other cities, by hopefully soon going all over the world, so that we can all kind of do that digitally on this platform called Subway Book Review with each other, and all see each other and all hear each other. And yeah, absolutely, that totally gives me joy. And if it wouldn't give me joy, I couldn't do it every day. I couldn't do it for 4 years. So I'm totally with you in that. Yes, like find an action that like really puts like some good vibes out in the world, and then some good vibes right back into you.
Yeah,
100%.
Totally. Okay, so I've got a couple of final questions. So obviously you've met a lot of people on the subway, but if you could meet anyone at all, who would it be? And what would you like to ask them?
That's a fabulous question. I've been thinking about that since yesterday. I have multiple answers to that. Okay, well, one person that comes to mind that I'm just like, I have a strange obsession with, and I can't really explain it because it's totally silly, but I would really like to meet Zach Posen on the subway, because I find his story totally fascinating in like how he came up as a fashion designer and how he originally started it as a experimental art project almost with his family, and then grew into this concept and into this brand. And I would just so like to ask him how he's feeling right now, and how the books that he's reading have helped him along this journey. I don't know why, but to me he's such a like interesting New Yorker. I would love to have asked Bill Cunningham what he's reading. And would have loved, but he was always on a bike, so that wouldn't have worked. He wasn't taking the subway. Let's see, I think some iconic New Yorkers. I recently did get to speak to Eileen Miles for 15 minutes on the subway about a book that she was reading, and that was enlightening and wonderful, and also, totally nerve-wracking because she's such a strong woman and such a strong personality, which I admire. I mean, obviously Beyonce.
That's not who I thought you were going to say, but that would be great. What would you ask her?
What would I ask Beyonce?
Yeah.
The same question that all people get on the subway. What are you reading and why? Tell me about it. That's it.
I'd love to know what Beyonce's reading.
Also Rihanna. What is Rihanna reading? Gotta know. If anyone has access to Beyonce and her bookshelf, do let us know. We're looking. No, but I think it's very important, people who influence culture, people who influence what we're thinking, what we're feeling. There's this beautiful quote: if you see a person reading a book you love, it's like that book is recommending that person. And I couldn't agree with it more.
If anyone wanted to get in touch about working together, what would be the best way to reach out to you in case anyone wants to contact you?
The best way to get in touch is to go to subwaybookrareview.com or to follow along on Instagram, shoot me a DM, send me an email. I'm easy to find. Ride the G train.
That's your local, is it?
Love the G train. Deep love for the G train.
Well, thanks, Uli. It's been really great talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.